Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Digging Up History by Sheila Connolly, narrated by Marguerite Gavin, a member of SAG-AFTRA. Chapter 1. I had almost succeeded in making the columns of numbers on the Society's estimated budget for the coming year add up when someone knocked on my door. I managed not to curse, but it wasn't easy. The annual board meeting was coming up fast, and I needed to get the spreadsheet worked out so I could write the usual scintillating prose to go with it. The sparkling language that would inspire the board members to whip out their checkbooks and write six-figure checks immediately. Well, I could hope. Not that I could remember anything like that happening at any board meeting I'd attended since I joined the staff of the Society for the Preservation of Pennsylvania Antiquities nearly a decade earlier. Now I ran the place as president, after a few years as director of development, but it hadn't gotten any easier. It was time for a break anyway. "Come in," I called out. Since my door was shut, I couldn't see who was knocking. The door opened slowly, and I recognized Dylan Robertson, a grad student/summer intern, the most recent in a long series of such interns. He managed to look both scared and excited, and he was gingerly clutching a paper-wrapped bundle. We'd hired him for the summer to catalog and examine a collection of old books that had been left to the Society in the will of one of our long-term supporters. I didn't hold out high hopes that the collection would hide anything of great value, but Harriet Featherstone had been a lovely lady, and she'd wanted us to have something to remember her by. I summoned up a smile. "Sit down, Dylan. I'm guessing you found something interesting. Is that from the Featherstone collection?" I gestured toward his bundle. I could swear that Dylan blushed.
I hope so. And yes, at least I think so. I've been doing some preliminary sorting and cleaning of the books and making notes of what repairs might be needed, or if they're even worth repairing. And I found something unexpected, I think.
"Sounds interesting. Is that what you brought with you? Tell me about it. Oh, and please sit down. You're making me nervous standing there." Dylan sat obediently.
You know about the collection, right?
"Sort of. I knew Harriet, and she used to talk about the books her father had collected, and the ones that she had added, but I never saw any of them. I know she was proud of the collection, but that could mean anything. Have you made a quick pass through all the books, and can you tell me generally what's in the collection?"
Sure. Mostly early 19th century books, leather-bound, not in the greatest condition. A few earlier Bibles that look like they've been well used. The other books are what I'd guess you'd call serious, collections of sermons, some histories, nothing frivolous like poetry or fiction. There are a lot of books. I can't guess how many yet because they're scattered all over the building. If you want to keep the collection together, you're going to have to find some serious shelf space. Some of the books are more damaged than others, or are falling apart from age, even though it looks like Miss Featherstone took good care of them. You want me to give you an assessment of how much conservation would be needed, right?
"Yes, I did. I do. And I'm hoping you can help out with that. I know you don't have much experience in physical conservation, but it could be a good learning experience for you. You could get a feel for the process with the less valuable books. I'd call in someone to decide which those are. If you're willing, of course." Dylan seemed to relax just a bit.
Sure, that would be great.
"Good," I said firmly. "So what's that you're clutching?" Dylan seemed surprised to find he was still holding it gently.
Well, this one has some particular problems. The cover's kind of falling apart, which is the only reason I noticed. But I thought I should let you look at it before I tried to do anything with it.
He took off the acid-free paper wrapped around the book and held it out toward me. I laid in on my desk after clearing away a couple of stacks of financial records, and then I looked at it. It was fairly large, maybe 8 inches by 10 inches. The edges of the paper had been gilt once upon a time. The leather cover bore the remnants of a gold-stamped pattern. Once it might have been elegant, but now it was falling apart, the back cover dangling by a few threads. Either it had been well loved or badly abused. I opened it carefully to see what the text was. I was surprised. It appeared to be an early biography of some 18th century person I'd never heard of, but the binding was clearly later, by maybe 50 years. Someone had cared enough to rebind the book. It didn't look particularly valuable, but I was no expert on antique books. Whoever had repaired it had done a poor job, since the cover was splitting apart. "What is it you wanted me to look at?"
"Inside the back cover,"
he said, then watched as I carefully pulled the layers of the cover apart. What I saw confirmed my guess that it had been rebound, because there were materials and techniques that hadn't been used until well after the book's original publication date. That much I knew. I was still puzzling over why Dylan had asked me to look at it, until I noticed one of the layers of paper that had been used to reinforce the cover and its connection to the spine. Even I could tell that the paper was older than the book itself. It had probably been a handy piece of scrap paper that the bookbinder had salvaged from someplace else. While the paper was old, it was fairly heavyweight and had survived well, apart from the various holes needed to anchor it to the binding. I hoped there wasn't glue involved, but the whole piece seemed to be slightly loose. I rummaged through one of my desk drawers and came up with a magnifier and looked more closely, and thought I saw handwriting on the paper. It too had faded, but it was definitely script of some sort written by a human hand, a letter whose lines were neatly aligned and illegible. I looked up at Dylan. "All right, there's a letter bound into the new cover for the book. Is that what you wanted me to see?"
"Yes. I've read about people finding all sorts of old letters or documents in books that have been repaired. Like it's recycling. Why waste a perfectly good piece of paper? It probably didn't mean anything to whoever did it, but I thought I should clear it with you before I went any further."
It's too hard to read in its current state to know who wrote it or to whom it was sent, but it might be possible to enhance it somehow to tell. Don't get your hopes up. It probably isn't from anyone important, but it could be interesting. Look, I know you're new to all of this, so I wouldn't ask you to do any delicate work on it, but I can call a friend or two to see what they think. If they believe it's worth the time and effort, you can work with them. Is that all right? Dylan's face lit up.
"That would be great. It'd be like getting to know a book from the inside out. Sure, I've read about how people assembled them and bound them, but it's not the same as actually handling one. If you don't mind, of course."
"You're here to learn, Dylan, and this is a good opportunity, and you're the one who found it. So if I can find someone with the right expertise, you have every right to be part of the restoration, if that's what we decide to do with it. Worst case, we could make it a standalone display so people could see how books were put together a couple of centuries ago. And you were right to bring it to me." I handed the book back to him. "See if there's a way to remove the letter without damaging the book. Then let me know what you find out." Dylan all but bounced out of his chair.
"Thank you. You want me to go back to gathering and inventorying the collection now, or should I handle the letter first?"
"If you can extract the letter easily, go ahead with that. But be careful. We don't know what we're looking at. When you finish that, go back to the collection so we can look at it as a whole and see where the letter might fit, and why someone cared enough to save it. Or maybe we'll find other rebound books. So go finish up the cataloging, write up brief descriptions of each book, and we can go over it together. Does that work for you?"
"Oh, yes. Oh, it shouldn't take long. I'm about 2/3 of the way through it, and I'm trying to include whatever details I find."
"Good. Let me know when you're finished."
"Thank you, Ms. Pratt. Nell."
He pivoted and hurried out of my office, shutting the door behind him, leaving me staring at the battered book in front of me. People who worked with antiques, items, buildings, whatever, held a small flickering hope in their heart that they might find something wonderful. Of course, we all believed that all old objects are wonderful, simply because they had survived for a long time in a chaotic world. But there are a few treasures lurking out there somewhere. Me, I'd started out as an English major and somehow drifted into raising money for institutions, but along the way I had caught the collecting bug. Luckily, I could indulge in it vicariously, since I worked in a building packed to the rafters with antique things. Mostly books, but also some curious antique pieces that had been given to the society by some long-dead donor and that we didn't know what to do with. Sometimes I fantasized that it was like a road map of history, except that all the pieces were scattered. That's one reason that Dylan was inventorying this new collection, to try to determine where it should be added to the Society's holdings. I didn't think that the collection itself was important enough to command its own space, but from my brief examination I thought it was worthy of being integrated, and that Harriet Featherstone should be honored for her contribution. I sometimes wondered whether she had simply inherited the whole lot from a deceased relative. Dylan had mentioned her father, how much of the collecting she had done herself, and whether she had enjoyed her own finds. She had been a lovely lady, and she'd also had a sharp mind and a good eye for collectibles. I sighed. I'd have to think about who I could call, who might have any expertise in antique bookbinding, after I'd finished the financial reports. I arrived home almost on time, and when I opened the back door after parking, I was hit with a delightful blast of something that smelled wonderful. James had cooked. I didn't care what it was, as long as I didn't have to deal with it. James and I were still kind of feeling our way through a relatively new relationship. Buying a house together had definitely kicked things up a notch, but I couldn't say that we'd established a basic routine. James is an FBI agent, so the demands of his job are very different from mine, but that gave us plenty to talk about, as long as his current assignment wasn't hush-hush. We'd worked together on more than one, case sounded too formal, but there seemed to have been crimes involved. Still, I would say we worked well together. "Anything interesting you can talk about?" I asked as he set a full plate in front of me, as well as a glass of wine. He went back to the kitchen to retrieve his own meal.
Not much of anything going on. Didn't someone write a book called Death Takes a Holiday?
That was a movie, back in the 30s, I think, but I couldn't tell you who. But speaking of books, my summer intern Dylan found something interesting today. I was bored silly working on the society's budget, so I let him explain it all to me.
And this was?
I think I told you we received a bequest from one of our long-term members, who just died. I asked him to catalog it and assess the individual volumes, see if they needed conservation and so on. He brought me an old book that was in bad shape, but the cover had already been replaced once. But that's not the interesting part. The newer cover was in bad shape, and apparently the bookbinder had kind of stuffed the new cover with whatever he could lay his hands on to stiffen it up. From what little Dylan and I could see, there seems to be a letter inserted among the stuffing that looks older than the cover, and maybe even the book itself.
And what was it about?
That's what we don't know. We didn't want to rip it apart to find out, but there wasn't enough of it showing to make a guess. It may never be possible because it's so faded anyway, which leads me to wonder if it's worth taking apart to see.
Sounds like it should be rebound anyway, if the society is planning to keep it.
True, but I guess I'm naturally curious. I want to know what's in the letter.
What would a conservator do?
I don't have a clue. That's the problem. I know the theory, but I've never done it, and I don't think this is a good way to start. I could call for outside help. I know a few people.
May I make a suggestion?
Of course, what?
This is on paper, right? With ink that looks brown now?
Yes, I said cautiously. So?
It could be that the FBI lab would be able to help, without destroying the evidence, their letter.
Okay, I'm interested. But won't your office have a problem with you bringing something from the society for them to analyze in your super-duper high-tech lab?
They could, but a few people owe me favors, and it wouldn't take long. And it wouldn't be invasive, which I believe matters to you.
Well, yes, that's a good point. If it's a secret message from George Washington, we'd all be drooling. If it's somebody's shopping list from 1800, not so much.
You'll never know until you get a good look at it.
True. Maybe I could bring it over to your office at lunch tomorrow, and we shall see what we shall see.
Great. You doing the dishes, or am I?
Is there dessert? When James nodded in the affirmative, I said, "Then I'll do them. I'd like to eat dessert before I fall asleep." Chapter 2. James and I did get some sleep before the sun came up. Our relationship was still kind of new, and some might say we had rushed into things, but neither of us was young, and we knew our own minds. We'd also been through some challenging times, like when I'd had to shoot someone to protect him, so we knew we could handle it. And I had to admit that it was kind of fun having an FBI agent on call as needed. It was surprising how many times I'd called him in to help with something odd happening at the society. Most people don't think of our library as a crime scene, but there had been at least one body since I'd been working there.
"Breakfast?"
He mumbled into his pillow. I rolled over to face him. Is that a request, or are you volunteering to make it?
"I made dinner."
That's right, you did. Do you have any early meetings, or can I take my time?
"No rush."
As I took a shower, I reviewed my tasks for the day. The report to the board wasn't due until next week, and while I wasn't exactly finished with it, I knew I could get it done in time. I wasn't sure most of the board members would read it anyway, or more than the summary page. I'd asked Dylan to finish his initial survey of the Featherstone collection, and I hoped he could extricate the mystery letter bound into that one book. Would there be more to be found in other books? I wondered. From what I'd seen of his work, he was careful, and I trusted he would come to me if that task was too much for him. I'd give him until lunch before nagging him about it. I had to admit I was curious to see what it turned out to be. Then there was the question of who to ask to take a more skilled look at it. If it warranted further study, no way was I going to attempt to restore it or even touch it, since I had next to no conservation experience. But I trusted James to handle it. I had to assume that any evidence presented to the FBI for analysis would be treated with kid gloves, or nowadays latex. Besides, I wanted no more than a quick assessment from him, or his forensics people, so we could read it to find out if it was worth pursuing further. I amused myself by imagining what it might be. Reluctantly, I rejected General George Washington as the writer, not that there weren't plenty of documents in his own hand that had survived. He'd written a lot of letters in his lifetime. But he would still have been a household name back then, when the book had been rebound, so it seemed unlikely that the bookbinder hadn't noticed or cared. Maybe he'd hidden the letter deliberately. Well, we wouldn't know who wrote it until we could read it, if that were ever possible, so I shouldn't get ahead of myself. If Washington had indeed written tens of thousands of letters, many of which had survived, I assumed many would not be extraordinarily valuable. But it might be worth a nice little piece of change, and the society would have no trouble finding something worthy to do with it. Unless it was a bill for shoeing his horse, but if it was signed, even that prosaic item could be valuable. James and I shared a leisurely breakfast. It was nice not to have any crises to attend to immediately, and I finally carried the few dishes to the sink. Is it still okay if I bring the mystery letter over to your office at midday sometime?
Unless something unexpected comes up, sure. Don't expect too much. We've got only a skeleton team in the Philadelphia office. The main lab, of course, is in Quantico, and I don't think this merits their attention. But what you really want is simply to be able to read the handwriting and identify who wrote it and to whom, right?
That's a good start. It may be a receipt for a hat for all I know, but I thought I should have it checked out. Of course, we museum people are always hoping for a big find, even though we know how rare they are. Maybe I should ask somebody on the staff to check Harriet's family tree. There might be someone in her family line who could have been the writer, or the recipient.
You're enjoying this, aren't you?
James said, smiling. I am. I'm happy to have something to do that doesn't consist of adding up columns of numbers, which never come out to as much as I'd hoped. And collecting and preserving is what we do at the society. Sometimes I have to remind myself of that.
Good point. Are we driving or taking the train?
I hate parking in the city when I don't have to. I vote for the train, then I'll join you. One nice thing about summer in Philadelphia is that so many people take vacations and head for the shore, which of course means New Jersey. That leaves the city much easier to get around in. But I still preferred taking the train, as long as the air conditioning was working. When James drove, I actually had a chance to admire the scenery, take note of what had changed. Things are always changing in the city. What had been knocked down, and what had been prettied up so owners and developers could demand a higher price. Still, it was a nice city to live in, although I admit I was enjoying a house in the burbs, particularly since James lived there too. And it was an easy walk from the house to the nearest train station, and once in town I could go all the way to the Society Underground, so I didn't have to get wet when it rained. I figured it was the best of all worlds, if you liked cities. I arrived on time and found Dylan hovering in the hallway outside my office. Not even my tireless administrative assistant had arrived yet, although she'd had to stay late a couple of times recently to work on those blasted budget pages, so I didn't begrudge her the time off. "Hey, Dylan," I greeted him as I opened my door. "Do I have time for a cup of coffee, or have you made some amazing discovery?" He looked a bit bewildered until he figured out that I was joking.
"Oh, I already made some coffee. Want me to bring you a cup?"
If we're looking at antique paper items, we probably shouldn't put a cup of coffee anywhere near them. I'll walk with you to the break room, and we can drink a cup there, and you can explain what you've found.
"Sounds good to me,"
he said, and led the way to the far end of the hall. I was glad to see he wasn't carrying anything, like the Featherstone book, because I was scrupulous about not exposing any of our collections to contamination or just plain dirt. Once we were settled with reasonably fresh coffee, I said, "Okay, what have you got?" Dylan was looking very pleased with himself.
"Well, I stayed late last night because I was curious, but I didn't want to rush taking the binding apart. I looked up a few references on bookbinding and restoration, and I called one of my friends in my program, and then I very carefully took the thing apart. And I took pictures at each step in case there's something I missed. I must have finished up around midnight, but I did manage to separate all the pieces of the binding."
"That sounds good. The letter came out intact? I mean, it was a letter, wasn't it? Not just a shopping list?"
"I think so," he said cautiously. "I can't say whether it was in lousy condition when it got bound into the book, or whether something happened to it in the last 200 years, but it's pretty much illegible. But yes, it was a letter, only I can't read it. It's too faded and stained. I think there's some kind of map on it, but it's just a jumble of lines which might be streets, so I won't swear to it."
"Any guesses?" I asked. I wasn't too upset because I knew I had James's lab in my back pocket. Dylan shook his head.
"Nope, I couldn't make out any words, though I think there are some. So for all I know, it could be a map of the moon. Sorry."
"Don't be. I had a brainstorm. You know I'm involved with an FBI agent." Involved was kind of an understatement, but our ongoing relationship wasn't exactly a secret, and I had to call it something. There's a lab at the local headquarters, not a big fancy one with a whole bunch of electronic super equipment, but one that can handle small projects, plus some well-trained people who work there and who James knows. He volunteered to ask one of them if they could take a look at the letter. He's been hanging out with me long enough to know how carefully this kind of thing has to be handled, so I trust him to keep an eye on the process. I told him I'd bring it over there today, assuming you had managed to retrieve it, and you did. You might want to go with him, if he can get you in. I don't think he knows a whole lot about 18th century handwriting, so he might need an interpreter. Dylan looked as though I'd handed him an early Christmas present.
"That'd be great. I didn't see enough to say that it's not like a continuous letter. You know, with regular lines of text. Apart from the thing that might be a map, it's more like occasional words scattered around in no obvious order. That's all I could see. If I go, can I talk to the science guys? It might be useful to know what kind of chemicals or lights or whatever can work on paper without destroying it."
"We've got a few things here, but not enough for really serious work. We can clean things if we're careful, but anything delicate, which is most old documents, we usually send to a real expert. There's no shortage of those in Philadelphia. You must have noticed that already."
"Yeah, that's pretty clear. But I'm not worried about competition. I just like doing it. Handling the old things, like little pieces of history in my hand."
"Good for you," I said enthusiastically, and realized how little I knew about Dylan. I might have chatted with him when he applied for the summer internship, but I had no idea where he was from or what his longer-term interests were. My bad. "So, are you going to show me what you've got?"
"Sure. Wish it was more. Should we go back to your office?"
"Follow me, and leave the coffee here." I led the way back to my office and sat behind the desk, moving what papers I'd left scattered on it. He waited until it was clear before he unwrapped his package, the same one as yesterday, only now it should be cleaner, I hoped, and laid out the letter, carefully protected by an acid-free sheet protector, and placed it gently on the surface. I had to work hard not to laugh. I hadn't expected anything magnificent, but what I saw was a rectangle of paper that looked like it had been soaked in tea for years. It was interrupted by the occasional darker patch, which I assumed had once been handwriting, plus a cluster of squiggles that must have been the hypothetical map Dylan had mentioned. It was disappointing, but I reminded myself that science had come a long way, and sometimes it was possible to see things that were invisible to the naked eye. I hoped. Dylan was watching me with a rueful smile on his face.
Doesn't look like much, does it?
No, but we're not done yet. This is just the first round. You've done a good job of removing it from the rest of the book without damaging it. Did you find anything else in the book cover?
No. Mainly it was what you'd expect to find on a 2-century-old job, mostly padding. I think it's safe to say that nothing else there was as old as this piece of paper.
Did you get any sense of whether it was concealed deliberately, or was used only because it was handy?
It was one layer of a bunch of layers, nothing special. I've saved all the pieces and numbered them in order. I thought maybe some of the letters might have transferred themselves to another layer.
Good thinking, Dylan. Let me give James a call and see when he'll be free. Or rather, his technicians. He's just introducing us. You don't have anything else on your calendar for today, do you?
Nothing that can't wait. I'm almost done cataloging the Featherstone books. They're a real hodgepodge. Did you know the lady?
Not well. She was already in her 80s when I started working here. She'd come to events that we held here now and then, and she was kind enough to talk to everyone, including junior staff like me. I'll bet she had some great stories to tell, but I never had the time to listen to them all. I don't think she had a lot of money, although maybe she had come from a wealthy family. The book collection was all she left us, but nobody assumed they were rare or valuable. I think she just wanted to leave something for us to remember her by. Hang on while I call James. I hit his speed dial number and he picked up quickly. Hi, it's me. Dylan has separated the letter we talked about from the rest of the book. Is there a good time to stop by and deliver it? And I kind of promised him that he could see what your lab people do with it, if you don't mind.
That's fine, actually. Did he learn anything more about it?
No, it's basically illegible, but there's enough ink left to show that it had something on it. And squiggles. Dylan thinks it could be what's left of a map.
Interesting. I'll meet you downstairs in, say, half an hour. That work for you?
Fine. See you soon. I hung up and turned back to Dylan. We're on as soon as we can get there. Oh, maybe you shouldn't mention the FBI angle if you talk about this.
Why not?
More than one reason, I guess. I can fill you in when we walk over. Nothing underhanded or illegal, and we're not paying for it. But I don't need the board members asking me why the first thought I had was to bring in the FBI. Okay?
Got it. I'll put the letter in something sturdier to carry it. Meet you downstairs.
Chapter 3. It was still cool and clear when Dylan and I set off for the FBI building. Another nice thing about Philadelphia, summer mornings. By noon it would be hot and sticky, but early enough it was very pleasant. I didn't often get a chance to do a little sightseeing once I'd checked off Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell from my must-see list, so it was a treat to stroll along and actually look at the city blocks. Did you grow up around here, Dylan? I asked him.
Nope, Delaware, although my folks used to make family visits to Philadelphia now and then.
So you've done the obvious places. What about Valley Forge?
Not yet. I'm living in the city and I don't have a car, so I don't get out to the suburbs much. Is it worth the trip?
I thought so, but then I only saw it a couple of years ago. If you're in the neighborhood for some reason, stop by and look around. It won't take you long. You must have seen Winterthur.
Sure, in the Brandywine Museum.
I'm glad to hear that. I love that place. But how did you get interested in curatorship?
It always made me sad to see old things neglected and falling apart. And I'm sure I don't have to tell you that people don't often have the time or the skills to fix them.
I know. Sometimes it breaks my heart, what's being lost forever simply because of neglect. And I can't imagine living in a modern ticky-tacky house. I much prefer my Victorian. It takes work to keep it in good shape, but it's worth it. I watched enough network television to know that the important FBI crime lab was in Virginia. But I also knew that many items were given a quick once-over in the Philadelphia building and a few other nearby locations. Since I didn't think we were dealing with something that can...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?